The story begins long before the Vikings ever spoke the name Valhalla, long before poets carved its image into memory through verse and myth. It begins in a colder, quieter world, Bronze Age Scandinavia, where the land itself seemed to shape the people into something hard, disciplined, and bound to survival. Between roughly 1700 and 500 BC, across what we now call Denmark, southern Sweden, and Norway, societies emerged that revolved not just around farming or trade, but around something deeper: honor, warfare, and the memory of the fallen. If you stood there in that distant past, you would not see Valhalla, not yet, but you would feel its shadow forming. Across these lands, archaeologists have uncovered graves that tell a very specific story. These are not simple burials. They're statements. In places like the Kivik grave in southeastern Sweden, dating to around 1400 BC, massive stone tombs were constructed with deliberate care, almost like miniature monuments to power. Inside, the dead were not laid to rest quietly. They were surrounded, armed, honored, prepared. Bronze swords rested beside them. Axes were placed with precision. Razors, ceremonial objects, and carved stones filled the chamber. But it is the imagery carved into those stones that truly reveals what these people believed. Scenes show warriors, chariots, and what appear to be processions. Figures moving toward a large structure, something that looks unmistakably like a hall. This is where the idea begins to take shape. Even in the Bronze Age, long before Norse mythology was written down, there was already a belief forming that death, at least for warriors, was not an end, but a transition. Not into emptiness, but into a place, a destination, a hall. And this idea wasn't isolated. Across Scandinavia, similar burial patterns appear again and again. In regions like Västergötland, graves reveal weapons that were deliberately broken before being placed with the dead. Swords bent, spearheads snapped, shields crushed. At first glance, it seems destructive, almost disrespectful, but it was the opposite. These objects were not being discarded. They were being transformed. To these ancient people, breaking a weapon was a ritual act. It killed the object in the physical world, so it could be reborn in another. The warrior would not go into the next life unarmed. They would go equipped, ready as they had lived. The hall they were heading toward was not peaceful in a modern sense. It was a continuation of their identity. Warriors remained warriors. At the same time, something else was developing, something just as important as the weapons themselves. The hall. Excavations across Scandinavia reveal large wooden structures, great halls that stood at the center of society. These were not ordinary buildings. They were massive, sometimes stretching over 50 meters in length, supported by thick timber posts, capable of holding entire communities. These halls were places of feasting, decision-making, storytelling, and ritual. They were the heart of the world. Inside these halls, leaders gathered their warriors. Bonds were formed over shared meals. Loyalty was reinforced. Stories of past battles were told and retold, turning memory into legend. The hall was not just a physical space. It was a symbol of order, of belonging, of civilization itself, standing against the chaos outside. And this is crucial to understanding Valhalla. Because when these people imagined the afterlife, they didn't imagine something abstract or distant. They imagined something familiar, but perfected. A hall, greater than any on earth, where the bonds of warrior brotherhood continued forever. Over time, this idea deepened. Language itself preserves the transformation. The word that will become Valhalla comes from ancient roots, words meaning the slain and hall. Not just any dead, but specifically those who died in battle, those who fell with weapons in hand. They were different. They belonged somewhere else. And this distinction appears again and again, not just in Scandinavia, but across Indo-European cultures. In Celtic traditions, there are stories of otherworldly halls where warriors feasted eternally. In Irish myths, the Tuatha Dé Danann lived in hidden mounds that contained great halls filled with endless food and drink. In Welsh tales, warriors rode into other realms where hunting and battle never ceased. Even farther east, similar patterns emerge. In ancient Indo-Iranian beliefs, there existed a house of song, a place where the righteous, especially warriors, would continue their existence in a state of eternal struggle and celebration. In early Vedic traditions, warriors who died in battle joined the gods, fighting alongside them in cosmic conflicts. This was not coincidence. It was a shared inheritance, an ancient pattern carried across cultures, evolving differently in each place, but always retaining the same core idea. Death in battle was not just honorable. It was transformative. It granted access to something greater. Back in Scandinavia, these beliefs became increasingly visible in burial practices. One of the most striking developments was the use of ships in burials. The dead were placed inside boats, sometimes small, sometimes enormous, and buried with weapons, tools, and personal belongings. These were not symbolic gestures. They were practical preparations for a journey. The ship represented passage from the known world to the unknown, from life to whatever lay beyond. In sites like the Jort Spring boat burial in Denmark, dating to around 400 BC, entire collections of weapons were placed as if a full crew had been sent into the afterlife together. Later, in the Viking Age, this practice would become even more elaborate. But even in these earlier periods, the idea is clear. The dead were traveling somewhere, and that somewhere required not just weapons, but community, a hall. At the same time, vast deposits of weapons began appearing in lakes, bogs, and rivers. Thousands of spears, shields, and swords were thrown into the water, often broken beforehand. These were offerings, but not in the simple sense of sacrifice. They were transfers. The weapons were being given to powers beyond the human world, perhaps to gods, perhaps to the spirits of the fallen. The scale of these deposits suggests something organized, something systematic. This wasn't random devotion. It was a belief system in action. The warriors who died did not vanish. They continued to exist, and they required the same things in death that they had in life. Weapons, companions, a place to gather, a hall. And then there are the halls themselves, the physical ones. Archaeological sites reveal that many of these great halls were not permanent. They were burned, deliberately, then rebuilt on the same foundations, again and again. This wasn't destruction. It was renewal. The burning of a hall may have been a ritual act, symbolizing death and rebirth, mirroring the very beliefs about the warriors themselves. Just as a weapon was killed to enter the next world, perhaps a hall was destroyed to be reborn stronger, more sacred. Layer upon layer of ash, weapons, and feasting remains built up over time, creating a physical record of belief, a cycle of use, destruction, and renewal that reflects a deeper understanding of existence. Nothing truly ends. It transforms. And from all of this, from graves, from halls, from language, from ritual, a single idea slowly crystallizes. Not suddenly, not in one moment, but over centuries. A great hall beyond death. A place where warriors gather. A place where battle continues, but so does fellowship. A place that reflects everything they valued in life, but elevated, perfected, eternal. Valhalla is not invented. It is grown. It rises out of earth and fire, out of broken swords and burned halls, out of stories told around flickering flames and timber structures that stood against the northern cold. By the time the Viking Age arrives, by the time poets begin to speak of Odin and his Hall of the Slain, the foundation has already been laid. The people already know what awaits. They have known for centuries. They just haven't given it a name yet. And then, after centuries of silence, of graves, fire, and ritual, the veil finally lifts. Not through archaeology this time, not through broken weapons or buried ships, but through words. Spoken first in the dim light of longhouses, carried by memory, shaped by rhythm and breath, and eventually written down in what we now call the Poetic Edda, a collection that does not invent Valhalla, but reveals it as if the idea had been waiting all along for a voice strong enough to speak it clearly. Now, for the first time, the hall is no longer a shadow. It has doors. It has walls. It has purpose. And at its center stand a figure who had always been there, watching, waiting, gathering. Odin. In the poem Grimnismal, Valhalla is described not vaguely, but with a kind of precision that feels almost deliberate, almost architectural, as if the poet wanted the listener not just to imagine it, but to see it. 500 doors and 40 more. Not a poetic exaggeration thrown in for grandeur, but a number repeated with purpose. From each door, 800 warriors can emerge at once. The scale is staggering. Not just a hall, but a structure built for something immense, something inevitable. This is not a paradise. This is preparation. Because Valhalla is not meant for rest. It is meant for war. The warriors who dwell there, the Einherjar, the chosen slain, do not spend eternity in peace. Every day, they rise, take up weapons that seem to appear as if summoned by memory itself, and march out into battle. They fight. They clash. They kill each other with the same intensity, the same fury, the same skill that defined their lives. And every evening, they return. Not wounded, not diminished, whole again. This is the first great paradox of Valhalla, one that makes it fundamentally different from almost every other concept of an afterlife. Death is not an end there. It is part of the cycle, a daily ritual, a necessary repetition that sharpens them, prepares them, keeps them ready. Because all of this is leading somewhere. The poets never let you forget that. In Voluspa, the story widens. The hall is no longer just a place for warriors. It becomes part of something much larger. A cosmic narrative, a timeline that stretches from the beginning of the world to its inevitable destruction. Ragnarok, the final battle. And suddenly, Valhalla makes sense in a way it never fully did before. It is not simply a reward for bravery. It is a recruitment hall, a training ground, a place where the greatest warriors who ever lived are gathered, honed, and prepared for a war that will decide the fate of everything. Even gods are not safe from it. Odin knows this. That is why he gathers them. That is why the Valkyries ride across battlefields, choosing who will fall and who will live. Death is not random. It is selection. Purposeful, calculated, and not always moral in the way we might expect. Because the poems hint at something unsettling. The Einherjar are not chosen because they are good. They are chosen because they are effective. Because they fight well. Because they do not break. Some passages suggest that even oath breakers, even those who lived questionable lives, can find their way to Valhalla if they die the right way, if they fall in battle. This is a world where skill in war outweighs virtue. A reflection, perhaps, of the societies that created these stories, where survival often depended not on being just, but on being strong. Inside the hall, everything reinforces this purpose. The roof itself is made from shields. The rafters are spears. Armor lies across the benches, as if even the structure refuses to forget what it exists for. Valhalla is not decorated with weapons, it is built from them. Even the creatures within it carry meaning. A great boar, Sarimnir, is cooked every day, providing endless meat for the warriors. Yet each evening, it is whole again, ready to be prepared once more. A goat, Ern, stands atop the hall, producing an unending flow of mead that fills the drinking horns of the Einherjar. Nothing runs out. Nothing decays. Everything renews. This is not abundance for comfort. It is abundance to remove distraction. Hunger, thirst, scarcity, these things belong to the mortal world. In Valhalla, they're eliminated so that only one thing remains. Val, preparation, purpose. And yet there is something else there too. Something quieter, but just as important. Fellowship. When the battles end each day, the warriors sit together. They drink. They speak. They exist not as enemies, but as companions. The same men who fought each other to death hours before now share food and laughter. Conflict and unity, side by side. It is, in a strange way, the perfect resolution of a warrior's life. The struggle never ends, but neither does the bond between those who share it. In another poem, Vafranismal, this daily cycle is described almost casually, as if it is simply the natural order of things. The question is asked, what do the warriors do when they are not fighting? They fight, then they feast. There is no contradiction in this, no attempt to justify it or explain it further. It simply is, because in this worldview, existence itself is cyclical, not linear, not moving toward a final peace, but rotating through patterns, battle, death, renewal, and back again. And even Valhalla is not outside this cycle. It will end. That is perhaps the most striking element of all. Unlike many visions of paradise, Valhalla is not eternal. It exists within time, within the same cosmic structure that governs everything else. And when Ragnarok arrives, when the final battle begins, the Einherjar will march out of those 540 doors. For the last time, they will fight alongside Odin. They will face forces far greater than anything they have ever encountered. And they will fall. Not all, perhaps, but many. And the hall they trained in, the place that defined their afterlife, will be consumed along with the rest of the world. Fire will take it, just as fire once took the great halls of the living. And here, the myth circles back to its origins. Because what the poets describe is not something entirely new. It is something ancient, reshaped and given voice. The burning of halls, the cycle of destruction and renewal, the idea that even the greatest structures must fall. These are not inventions of the Viking Age. They are echoes of Bronze Age rituals, of halls burned and rebuilt, of weapons broken to be reborn, of a worldview that never saw endings as final, but always as transitions. Valhalla, in the end, is not just a place. It is a reflection of how these people understood existence itself. You live, you fight, you die, and then you continue. Not in peace, not in stillness, but in motion, in purpose, in preparation for something greater than yourself. And now the story stops being something you glimpse in fragments and becomes something you can walk through. Not because the myth suddenly changed, but because one man decided they needed to be understood. Not just remembered, not just recited, but arranged, clarified, built into something that could stand on its own even as the old world that created it was fading. That man was Snorri Sturluson, writing in the early 13th century, long after Scandinavia had begun its transition into Christianity, long after the age of Viking expansion had ended, but not so long that the old stories had disappeared. He stood in a strange position, looking both forward and backward at the same time. Behind him was a world of oral tradition, where poets spoke of gods and warriors in layered metaphors, where Valhalla existed in glimpses, shields, spears, endless doors, the clash of daily battle. Ahead of him was a literate, organized world that demanded structure, explanation, and coherence. And so what he created in the Prose Edda was not just a retelling, but a transformation. He did not invent Valhalla. He engineered it. Where earlier poems gave flashes of imagery, Snorri gives form. Where earlier traditions left ambiguity, he imposes clarity. And suddenly, Valhalla is no longer just a poetic idea. It becomes a place you can imagine in detail, almost as if it could exist in the physical world. The hall stretches so vast that its ends cannot be seen. This is not metaphor anymore, it is scale. It is meant to overwhelm. The roof, no longer just implied through poetic fragments, is now described as being covered in golden shields, layered in such a way that they reflect light across the entire interior, bathing everything in a constant glow. This detail matters because it transforms Valhalla into something more than a warrior shelter. It becomes a symbol of divine authority. Gold does not decay. Gold does not rust. And so the hall itself becomes something that resists time, even while existing within a world that will eventually end. It shines not just to impress, but to declare that this place belongs to something greater than mortal existence. And yet, even as Snorri introduces this grandeur, he does not abandon the older, harsher imagery. The structure is still supported by spears, countless spear shafts rising like a forest, holding up the golden roof. The weapons are no longer just tools of war. They are part of the architecture itself. This is a hall built from violence, sustained by it, defined by it. And inside, everything is organized. That is Snorri's greatest contribution. Not the details themselves, but the system behind them. Because now we begin to understand how Valhalla actually functions. The warriors do not simply arrive. They are chosen. And that choice is not random, not mysterious in the way earlier poems suggest. It is a process, a structured act carried out by figures who become, under Snorri's hand, more than mythological symbols. They become agents. The Valkyries. These figures, who in earlier traditions could appear as terrifying spirits of death or shadowy presences on the battlefield, are now given roles, ranks, and responsibilities. They are no longer just choosers of the slain. They are organized, almost like an elite military order serving directly under Odin. Some Valkyries hold higher authority, capable of making independent decisions during large battles. Others operate under guidance, carrying out the will of Odin with precision. They are described with clarity, armored, armed, mounted on supernatural horses capable of moving between worlds without delay. And their task is specific. They watch the battlefield. They observe the warriors. They decide who will die. Not who deserves to die, but who must die. Who will be most useful in Valhalla. Courage matters. Skill matters. The ability to keep fighting when defeat is certain matters most of all. A warrior who stands firm in impossible conditions becomes more valuable than one who simply wins. Because Valhalla is not building a collection of heroes. It is building an army. And once chosen, the transition is immediate. The Valkyries do not simply mark the dead. They transport them. Their horses cross the boundary between worlds effortlessly, carrying the fallen from the chaos of the battlefield into the ordered structure of Odin's hall. Death is not a delay. It is a transfer. And when the warrior arrives, something remarkable happens. They are not broken. They are not weakened. They are perfected. Snorri describes how each morning, the Einherjar rise as if waking from sleep. Their weapons are already beside them. Not the ones they died with, but better ones. Ideal ones. Swords that do not dull. Spears that do not miss. Shields that do not fail. This detail transforms Valhalla into something more than a continuation of earthly life. It becomes an optimized version of it. Everything that could fail in the mortal world is removed. Everything that could weaken a warrior is eliminated. What remains is pure function, combat at its highest possible level. And then the day begins. The warriors divide, form ranks, prepare as if for a real battle, because it is real. They fight with full force, with no hesitation, no restraint. They kill each other. They fall. Blood is spilled. But death has no permanence here. By evening, they rise again. And this repetition is not meaningless. It is training. Perfect, endless training. Every day they learn. Every day they refine their skill. Every day they become more dangerous than they were before. Snorri makes this clear without ever stating it directly. Valhalla is a preparation machine. It exists for a future moment, and everything within it is designed to serve that purpose. Even the feasting, which might seem like a reward, is structured. The great boar, Saerimnir, is slaughtered and cooked each day, feeding the entire host. And yet, each night, it returns, whole, untouched, ready to be used again. The goat Ern produces endless mead, ensuring that no warrior ever goes thirsty. This is not indulgence. It is stability. By removing scarcity, Snorri removes conflict outside a battle. The warriors have no reason to fight over food, over drink, over status, because those needs are always met. The only place conflict exists is where it belongs, in combat. And even within the hall, there is order. Seating arrangements reflect status, not inherited status, but earned status. Warriors who distinguish themselves in life or in Valhalla sit closer to Odin. Those who arrived more recently sit further away. This creates a hierarchy, but one based on merit, on performance. The hall is not just a place of equality. It is a place of structure recognition. And at the center of it all is Odin, not just as a god, but as a strategist. This is perhaps the most important shift Snorri introduces. In earlier poetry, Odin is mysterious, unpredictable, often contradictory. But here, he becomes something more focused, a planner, a being who understands what is coming and is actively preparing for it. Ragnarok is no longer just a prophecy. It is a known outcome, and Valhalla is Odin's response to it. Everything he does, the selection of warriors, the organization of the hall, the endless training, serves a single purpose. When the final battle arrives, he will not face it unprepared. He will have an army unlike anything the world has ever seen. But there is something almost tragic in this, because Odin knows something the warriors do not fully grasp. Even with all this preparation, even with all these warriors, the outcome is not guaranteed. In many versions of the myth, it is already decided. The gods will fall. The world will burn. Valhalla itself will be destroyed. And yet, Odin continues. He builds. He gathers. He trains. Not because he can win easily, but because he must try. And this gives Valhalla a different meaning than it first appears to have. It is not just a reward for the brave. It is not just a continuation of the warrior's life. It is an act of defiance, a refusal to accept fate without resistance. The Einherjar are not just honored dead. They are participants in that defiance. Their existence has meaning not because it lasts forever, but because it leads to a final moment where everything will be tested. And this idea, this acceptance of inevitable destruction combined with relentless preparation, is deeply rooted in the cultures that created it. It reflects a worldview shaped by harsh environments, constant conflict, and the understanding that survival is never permanent. You fight not because you will always win. You fight because that is what gives your existence meaning. And Snorri captures this perfectly, even as he filters it through his own perspective, even as he introduces elements influenced by the Christian world he lived in, ideas of moral judgment, of divine awareness, of a structured cosmos where actions carry weight beyond immediate survival. He does not erase the old beliefs. He reframes them. He makes them legible to a new audience, one that no longer lives in the same world as the warriors of the past, but still wants to understand what that world meant. And in doing so, he ensures that Valhalla does not disappear. It survives, not as a living belief system, but as a recorded one, a preserved structure that can be studied, explored, and understood centuries later. But even Snorri's version is not the end of the story, because within that system, within that carefully organized vision, there are still figures who resist complete structure, figures whose origins are older, darker, and more complex. The Valkyries. In the next part, the story shifts again, not to the hall itself, but to those who decide who enters it. And through them, we begin to see how Valhalla is not just about warriors and gods, but about something deeper. Choice, fate, and the thin, shifting line between death and destiny. And now the story moves away from the hall itself, from its golden shields, its endless doors, its roaring battles, and focuses on something far more unsettling. Because Valhalla does not fill itself. Someone chooses. Someone decides which warriors rise again in Odin's hall, and which are left behind in silence. They are not gods, not quite, not mortals either. They exist somewhere in between, moving across battlefields unseen, watching, judging, deciding. And by the time their image becomes clear in Norse mythology, they are known as the Valkyries. But they did not begin that way. Long before they were described as armored maidens serving Odin, long before they carried drinking horns in golden halls, they were something much darker, something closer to the raw edge of death itself. If you go back far enough, not to the Viking Age, but to the centuries before it, you find traces of them not in stories, but in objects. Small figures buried with warriors, tiny shapes of bronze and gold, often no more than a few centimeters tall, placed carefully beside swords and shields. These figures are female. They hold spears. They stand not in peace, but in tension, as if caught in the moment before action. Archaeologists have uncovered them in places like Gamla Uppsala, where burial sites from the Vendel period reveal something remarkable. Warriors were not buried alone. Alongside their weapons were these figures, women, armed, watching. They were not wives. They were not servants. They were something else. At first, their meaning is unclear. But as more examples appear across Scandinavia, a pattern begins to emerge. These figures are consistent. They are intentional, and they appear specifically in contexts connected to war, which suggests something important. The idea of female beings connected to battle, connected to death, existed long before the Valkyries were ever named. And when we turn to early Germanic poetry, we begin to see how they were understood. In some of the oldest traditions, these beings are not noble. They're not beautiful. They're not even particularly human. They are predators. They move across battlefields after the fighting ends, feeding on the dead, tearing at flesh, drinking blood. They are described in ways that blur the line between woman and beast, part raven, part wolf, part something else entirely. They are not guiding souls. They are consuming them. This is the first form of the Valkyrie, not a chooser of the slain, but a devourer of the slain. And this matters because it shows how the concept begins, not with honor, not with destiny, but with the brutal reality of war. In a world where bodies were left on the battlefield, where scavenger animals tore at the fallen, it is not surprising that those images became mythologized. The raven becomes a symbol of Odin. The wolf becomes a companion to the battlefield. And the female figures, those who move among the dead, become something feared. But over time, something changes. As societies in Scandinavia become more structured, as warrior culture becomes more organized, these chaotic, terrifying figures begin to take on new roles. They're no longer just present after the battle. They become involved in it. They begin to influence it. In early continental sources, we see references to supernatural women who can affect the outcome of combat. They can bind warriors, preventing them from moving. They can release them, allowing them to fight with unnatural strength. They do not simply observe, they intervene. And with that shift, their nature begins to transform. They are no longer just creatures of death. They become agents of fate. By the time we reach the Viking Age, this transformation is complete. The Valkyries are no longer monstrous. They are described as striking, powerful, almost radiant figures, armored, mounted, carrying spears, moving through the air or across land with supernatural speed. They're still connected to death. But now, death is not something they feed on. It is something they control. They ride across battlefields at the moment when the outcome hangs in balance. They do not wait until the fighting is over. They are there in the middle of it, watching, choosing. And this is where their true power lies. Because the choice of who dies is not random. It is deliberate. A warrior may be stronger, faster, more skilled, but if a Valkyrie has marked him, he will fall. Another may be outmatched, overwhelmed, but if he is not chosen, he may survive against all odds. Victory and defeat are no longer purely human. They are shaped by something beyond human control. And this introduces attention into the entire system of Valhalla. Because if the Valkyries decide who dies, then death in battle is not simply the result of skill or fate. It is a selection process, a filtering system designed to gather specific individuals. The best, the most resilient, the most valuable. And when we return to the myths recorded in the Poetic Edda and later expanded by Snorri Sturluson, this role becomes even clearer. The Valkyries do not act independently. They serve Odin. They carry out his will. But this does not mean they are simple messengers. In many stories, they are shown making decisions, sometimes even defying expectations. They are intelligent, aware, capable of judgment. And sometimes they make mistakes. Or perhaps more accurately, they make choices that conflict with Odin's intentions. One of the most powerful examples of this is the story of Brynhildr. She is not just a Valkyrie. She is one of the most developed figures in all of Norse myth. And her story reveals something critical about the nature of these beings. Brynhildr is tasked with deciding the outcome of a battle. Odin has already chosen who should win, but she does not follow his command. Instead, she chooses differently, favoring a warrior she believes deserves victory more. In that moment, she does something extraordinary. She overrides fate, and for that, she is punished. Odin strips her of her Valkyrie status. He removes her from the battlefield, from the sky, from the role that defined her existence. She is cast down into the mortal world, forced to live as a human, her power reduced, her purpose altered. This story is not just a myth. It is a reflection of a deeper idea. Even beings who control fate are not entirely free from it. The Valkyries may choose who dies, but they themselves are bound by a higher structure, a system that even they cannot fully escape. And yet, their role remains essential. Because without them, Valhalla cannot exist. They are the bridge between worlds. They are the moment where life becomes death, and death becomes something else. They are the reason a fallen warrior does not simply disappear. Instead, he is taken, carried from the battlefield, not physically in the way we might imagine, but symbolically, spiritually, into something greater. The image of Valkyries riding through the sky, lifting the dead from the earth, is not just poetic. It is a way of understanding transformation. Death is not passive. It is an act, and the Valkyries perform it. But their role does not end there. When the warriors arrive in Valhalla, the Valkyries are still present. They do not return to the battlefield immediately. They serve within the hall as well, bringing drink, maintaining order, reinforcing the structure of the space. This dual role is important. They are both bringers of death and sustainers of the afterlife. They exist at the threshold, always between, and through them, we begin to see that Valhalla is not just a place of warriors and gods. It is a system that depends on movement, on selection, on transition. It cannot function without the constant flow of the dead being chosen and brought into it. It is not static. It is always growing, always preparing. And yet, just like the warriors they choose, the Valkyries themselves are part of a larger story that is moving toward an ending they cannot stop. Ragnarok. They gather the warriors. They build the army. They prepare for the final battle. But they know, in some sense, that the outcome is already written. And still they continue. Because in this world, purpose matters more than certainty. Action matters more than outcome. And that is what makes the Valkyries so central to the idea of Valhalla. They're not just servants. They are the embodiment of the belief that even in a universe where fate exists, choice still has power, even if that power is limited, even if it leads, inevitably, to the same end. And in the next part, the story moves toward that end, the final purpose of everything that has been built, gathered, and prepared. Ragnarok, the moment when Valhalla opens its doors and the army of the dead marches out to face the destruction of the world. And now everything that has been built, every hall raised, every warrior chosen, every battle fought again and again, finally begins to point toward the one moment it was always meant to serve. Not a distant idea, not a vague prophecy, but an event that exists in the minds of gods and warriors alike as something certain. Ragnarok. It is important to understand this from the beginning. This is not a war that might happen. It will happen. There is no uncertainty in it, no alternative path, no hidden escape waiting to be discovered at the last moment. Even Odin, who sees further than any other, who gathers knowledge at any cost, does not seek to avoid it. He prepares for it. That is the difference. In Valhalla, for all its grandeur, for all its endless battles and feasts, has only one true purpose: to create an army strong enough to stand in that final moment, even if victory itself is not guaranteed. The story of Ragnarok unfolds most clearly in Völuspá, where the future is not guessed at, but revealed. And what is revealed is not a sudden collapse, but a slow unraveling. It begins with signs. The world grows colder. Winters stretch longer, harsher, without relief. This is the Fimbulwinter, a season that does not end, a breaking of the natural cycle that had once governed life. Crops fail. Bonds between people weaken. Trust disappears. Brother turns against brother. order begins to fracture. And this matters because Valhalla was always about order. The hall, the warriors, the structure, it all exists as a defense against chaos. And now, that chaos is rising, not from outside alone, but from within the world itself. Then the boundaries begin to break. Creatures that have been held back, contained, begin to move. The great wolf Fenrir, once bound by the gods, breaks free. The serpent Jormungandr rises from the sea, its massive body coiling through the waters, poisoning the sky. Fire giants march from the south, led by Surtur, carrying flames that will consume everything in their path. This is not just war. This is collapse. The structure of the cosmos itself is failing. And in that moment, Valhalla becomes what it was always meant to be. The doors open. Those 540 doors, described long ago, not as decoration, not as exaggeration, but as preparation, now serve their purpose. From each one, 800 warriors emerge. Not scattered, not disorganized, but in formation. The Einherjar, the chosen slain, march out together. Every battle they have fought, every death they have experienced and overcome, every skill they have refined in the endless cycle of Valhalla, now becomes real in a way it never was before. This time, when they die, they will not rise again. This time it matters. And at their head stands Odin. He does not send them forward alone. He rides with them into a battle he already understands. There is no illusion here, no belief that this will be easy, no expectation that all will survive. But there is no hesitation either, because this is what they were made for. The battlefield of Ragnarok is not described as a single place, but as a convergence, a point where all forces meet. Gods, giants, monsters, the dead, the living, all drawn into the same conflict. The sky darkens, the earth trembles, the sea rises. Everything that exists is involved, and the fighting begins. The Einherjar clash with the forces of chaos. They fight, as they always have, fiercely, relentlessly. But this time there is no reset waiting at the end of the day. Each strike carries finality. Each fall is permanent. And still they fight, because that is the core of Valhalla's meaning. Not immortality, not safety, but the chance to stand in the most important moment that will ever exist. Odin himself seeks out Fenrir. This is not random. This is not chance. It is a confrontation that has been building from the beginning. The god who gathered the warriors, who sought knowledge, who tried to prepare for this moment, faces the force that represents uncontrollable destruction. And he is killed. Fenrir devours him. It happens not as a shock, but as a fulfillment of what was always known. Odin, for all his power, for all his preparation, cannot escape fate. And yet, his actions are not meaningless, because he did not stand alone. Around him, the Einherjar continue to fight. Other gods engage their own enemies. Thor battles Jormungandr and kills it, but takes only a few steps before falling himself, poisoned by the serpent's venom. Freyr faces Surtur and is defeated. One by one, the pillars of the old world fall. And still, the battle continues. Fire spreads across the world. Surtur's flames consume the land, the sky, the structures that once defined existence. Valhalla itself, the great hall, the golden roof, the endless doors, is not spared. It burns, just as the halls of the Bronze Age once burned, just as the rituals of destruction and renewal always suggested they would. And here, the story reveals something deeper than simple tragedy. Because Ragnarok is not just an ending. It is a cycle completing itself. Everything that was built will fall. Everything that existed will be destroyed. But that destruction is not meaningless. It is part of a pattern that has existed from the beginning. Creation, growth, conflict, destruction, and then something else. Because after the fire, after the collapse, after the silence that follows the end of everything, the world does not remain empty. It begins again. The myths tell us that a new earth rises from the sea, green, fertile, untouched by the destruction that came before. A few gods survive. A few humans emerge, having hidden from the chaos. life returns. And this changes how we understand Valhalla, because it means that its purpose was never to last forever. It was to exist at a specific moment in the cycle, to gather, to prepare, to fight, and to fall. The Einherjar are not meant to live eternally. They are meant to be ready, and when their moment comes, they fulfill it completely. There is no regret in that, no sense of failure, because in this worldview, meaning does not come from surviving forever. It comes from meeting the moment you were created for. And Valhalla, in that sense, is one of the most powerful ideas ever formed. Not because it promises eternal peace, but because it embraces something far more difficult. The idea that even knowing the end, even knowing that everything will fall, you still prepare, you still fight, you still stand. And that is what the warriors of Valhalla represent. Not victory, but defiance. Not immortality, but purpose. And when the flames of Ragnarok fade, when the old world is gone and the new one begins to rise, Valhalla does not return. Not in the same form. Not in the same way. Its time has passed. Its purpose has been fulfilled. But the idea behind it, the belief that life leads to something greater, that struggle has meaning, that even in the face of inevitable destruction, there is value in standing and fighting. That idea does not disappear. It survives, carried forward, reshaped, retold, just as it began long ago in the shadows of Bronze Age halls before it ever had a name. And even after the fire fades, after the gods fall, after the great hall itself is consumed and the old world collapses into silence, something remains. And it is not a building, not a place, not even a fixed belief system anymore, but something far more durable, something that does not burn when the roof collapses or disappear when the last warrior falls. Because what survives Valhalla is not its walls, but its meaning, and that meaning begins its long journey forward through time in ways that the people who first imagined it could never have fully understood, yet somehow prepared for all the same. Because when the old Norse world gave way to Christianity, when the halls were replaced by churches and the oral traditions slowly gave way to written doctrine, Valhalla did not simply vanish as one might expect a pagan belief to vanish under the weight of a new religion. Instead, it shifted, adapted, retreated into story and symbol, preserved not as something to be worshipped, but as something to be remembered, studied, even admired from a distance, and much of that survival is owed once again to Snorri Sturluson, whose work in the Prose Edda ensured that these myths were not lost when belief in them faded. Because he did something subtle but incredibly important, he reframed them. He presented them not as competing religious truths, but as cultural inheritance, as the stories of a people, which meant they could exist safely within a Christian world without needing to be erased. And this shift from belief to literature is what allowed Valhalla to survive the collapse of the system that created it. Because once something becomes story, it gains a different kind of immortality, one that is not tied to ritual or faith, but to memory and retelling. And so Valhalla moves forward into the medieval imagination, not as a destination people expect to reach, but as a powerful image, a symbol of a past that still resonates. And over time, that symbol begins to evolve again, shaped by new cultures, new ideas, new needs. Because as Europe moves through the Middle Ages and into the early modern period, the figure of the warrior itself begins to change, no longer defined purely by tribal loyalty or raiding culture, but by chivalry, by codes of honor, by structured warfare under kings and states. And yet even within these new systems, echoes of Valhalla remain. Because the idea that a warrior's death carries special meaning does not disappear, it transforms, it becomes tied to ideas of martyrdom, of noble sacrifice, of dying for a cause greater than oneself. And while the imagery shifts from shield halls to heavenly courts, from Odin to a Christian god, the underlying concept remains strikingly similar, that death in the act of struggle can elevate a person beyond ordinary existence. And this continuity becomes even more visible later, as interest in ancient cultures begins to grow again, particularly during periods like the Renaissance, and, more powerfully, the 18th and 19th centuries, when scholars, poets, and thinkers across Europe began to rediscover and reinterpret Norse mythology, not as a living religion, but as a source of identity, inspiration, and cultural depth. And it is during this time that Valhalla experiences something like a rebirth, not as a belief, but as an idea that can be reshaped to fit new narratives, new ideologies, new artistic expressions, appearing in literature, in poetry, in operas, in paintings, often romanticized, sometimes misunderstood, but always carrying that core image of the Great Hall where warriors gather beyond death. And this process continues into the modern world, where Valhalla becomes even more abstract, even more symbolic, appearing in contexts far removed from its original setting, referenced in discussions of heroism, used metaphorically to describe ultimate recognition or honor, appearing in films, games, books, and popular culture where its imagery is instantly recognizable even to those who may not know its origins. And yet, despite all these transformations, despite being filtered through centuries of reinterpretation, something remarkably consistent remains at its core, because Valhalla has never really been about the literal existence of a hall in the sky. It has always been about what that hall represents. And that is where its true endurance lies, because at its heart, Valhalla is a way of answering a question that every culture must face in one form or another. What does it mean to die? And more specifically, what does it mean to die in a way that matters? And the answer it gives is not comforting in the way many afterlife beliefs are comforting. It does not promise peace. It does not promise reunion with loved ones. It does not promise escape from struggle. Instead, it offers something more demanding, more intense. It offers continuation of purpose. The idea that the qualities that define you in life, your courage, your strength, your willingness to face danger, do not end with death, but are carried forward into something greater, something that requires you, something that depends on you. And this is why the image of Valhalla continues to resonate even in a world that no longer believes in Odin or the Einherjar, because the idea that life should lead to a moment of meaning, that struggle should not be wasted, that even in the face of inevitable loss, there is value in standing and fighting, is not limited to any one culture or time period. It is something deeply human, something that appears again and again in different forms. And Valhalla is simply one of the most vivid expressions of it ever created, and perhaps that is why it never truly disappears. Because even when people no longer believe in it as a literal place, they continue to use it as a metaphor, a shorthand for ultimate honor, for a place where the best are remembered, where those who gave everything are not forgotten. And in that sense, Valhalla still exists, not in the sky, not beyond the reach of the living, but in the stories we tell, in the way we remember those who came before us, in the way we try to give meaning to struggle and sacrifice. And when you look back at where it all began, at those Bronze Age graves, at the broken swords and burnt halls, at the earliest hints of a belief that death was not an end, but a transition, you can see that this idea was never really about a specific mythology. It was about a way of understanding the world, a way of facing its harshness without turning away, a way of saying that even if everything ends, even if the hall burns and the gods fall and the world itself is remade, there's still something worth building, something worth preparing for, something worth fighting for. And that is why the story of Valhalla does not truly end, not even after Ragnarok, because its final form is not a place that can be destroyed, but an idea that continues to evolve, carried forward each time it is told again, each time. Someone imagines that hall, hears the clash of weapons, sees the warriors rise once more, and understands, even for a moment, what it means to live with purpose in a world where nothing lasts forever. And even as the image of Valhalla settles into memory, as the flames of Ragnarok fade into silence and the Great Hall becomes something that exists more in story than in belief, the idea behind it does not stop moving forward. It shifts, it travels, it reshapes itself quietly across the North Sea, carried not by gods this time, but by people, by migrations, by shared roots that go back long before the Norse ever spoke the name Valhalla. And in that movement, the story does not end but continues. Because in the lands that would become England, among the early Germanic peoples who shared those same ancient Indo-European traditions, something remarkably similar begins to take form. Not identical, not a copy, but close enough that you can feel the connection, as if both worlds are echoing the same original idea in different voices. To understand this, you have to step into Anglo-Saxon England, into a time between the 5th and 10th centuries, when kingdoms were still forming, when warrior culture defined society, when loyalty to a lord was not just political, but deeply personal, almost sacred. And at the center of that world, just as it had been in Scandinavia, stood the hall. Not a metaphor, a real place. A structure of timber and firelight where warriors gathered, where kings distributed wealth, where stories were told, where identity itself was reinforced night after night. And just like in the earlier Scandinavian world, the hall was more than a building. It was the center of existence, which is why, when we look at one of the most important surviving texts of this culture, the epic poem Beowulf, we immediately recognize something familiar, even if it is not named the same way. The hall is called Heorot, and it stands at the heart of the story. Heorot is not Valhalla, but it feels like it could become it. It is described as a great mead hall, shining, powerful, filled with warriors who feast, drink, and share in the bonds of loyalty under their king. The imagery is almost identical to what we have already seen. The same emphasis on gathering, on shared meals, on the importance of community among fighters. But there is a difference. In Beowulf, the hall is still mortal. It can be attacked. It can fall. And it does. Because into this world comes Grendel, a creature not just of physical strength, but of chaos itself. Night after night, he attacks the hall, killing warriors, breaking the order that Heorot represents. And suddenly, we see the same tension that existed in the story of Valhalla, but now grounded in a human world. Order versus chaos. The hall versus the wilderness. The community versus the unknown. Beowulf himself enters this story not just as a hero, but as a defender of that order. When he fights Grendel, he is not simply proving his strength. He is restoring balance, protecting the hall, preserving the structure that defines the world around him. And this is where the connection deepens. Because even though Beowulf is a Christian-era text, written down by people who no longer worshipped Odin, it still carries the older ideas within it. The warriors in Heorot seek glory. They seek lasting fame. They understand that death in battle is not meaningless. It is a way to ensure that their name survives. This is not Valhalla exactly, but it is close. Instead of entering a literal hall of the dead, the Anglo-Saxon warrior seeks something slightly different. A form of immortality through memory, through reputation, through the stories that will be told after he is gone. But the structure is the same. You live. You fight. You earn your place. And if you do it well enough, you are not forgotten. And even in Beowulf, there are hints of something beyond that. Moments where the old belief almost breaks through the newer Christian framework. The emphasis on feasting, on the hall as a central symbol, on the idea that the bond between warriors continues beyond death, it all suggests that the concept of a warrior afterlife did not disappear. It adapted. It became less literal, more symbolic, but it remained. And when we look at burial practices in Anglo-Saxon England, we see even clearer evidence of this connection. The famous ship burial at Sutton, who reveals a world that still believed, at least in part, in the same ideas that shaped Valhalla. A great ship buried beneath the earth, weapons placed carefully within it, armor, treasures, objects meant not just for display, but for use. This is not just a grave. It is preparation. Just like the earlier Scandinavian ship burials, it suggests a journey, a continuation, a belief that the dead warrior is going somewhere, carrying with him the tools of his identity. And even though the people who created this burial may have been influenced by Christianity, the structure of the ritual tells a different story, one that connects directly back to the Bronze Age, to the Viking Age, to the same long chain of belief that eventually produced Valhalla. The hall may not be named, but the idea is still there. And this is where the transition becomes complete. Valhalla, as a specific mythological place, belongs to Norse tradition. But the idea behind it, the hall, the warriors, the continuation of purpose after death, is much older, much broader, and much more adaptable than any single culture. It survives by changing. In Scandinavia, it becomes Odin's hall. In Anglo-Saxon England, it becomes Herit and the idea of lasting fame. In later European traditions, it becomes honor, glory, legacy. Different forms, same core. And this connection does something important for the story we have been following. It shows that Valhalla was never isolated. It was part of a much larger pattern, a way of thinking about life and death that stretched across cultures, across centuries, evolving but never fully disappearing. And it also prepares us for what comes next. Because if the idea of the warrior afterlife could transform once, from Bronze Age ritual into Norse myth, from Norse myth into Anglo-Saxon epic, then it can transform again. And it does. And as the echoes of halls, of warriors, of firelit gatherings, and the clash of steel continue to move outward from the cold lands of the north, the story does not weaken. It expands, stretching far beyond Scandinavia, beyond Anglo-Saxon England, into regions that at first seem completely different, warmer, older in their written traditions, yet somehow carrying something deeply familiar beneath the surface. Something that feels less like coincidence and more like memory, as if all of these cultures are drawing from a shared past so distant that it no longer belongs to any one people, but instead exists as a kind of inherited structure of thought. And it is here, in the ancient traditions of Indo-Iranian and Vedic cultures, that we begin to see one of the most striking parallels to Valhalla. Not as a direct copy, not as the same myth told differently, but as a transformation of the same core idea into something more cosmic, more philosophical, yet still rooted in the same. Fundamental question: what happens to the warrior who dies in battle? And why does that death matter? To understand this, you have to shift the setting completely, away from the wooden halls of the north, away from the cold seas and dark forests, into a world shaped by vast plains, by early cities, by ritual and philosophy developing alongside warfare. And here, the warrior is still central, still respected, still defined by courage and action, but the framework around him is different because in these cultures, particularly in the early Vedic tradition of ancient India, the idea of duty, dharma, becomes the foundation of everything. A warrior does not simply fight for glory. He fights because it is his role, because the structure of the universe depends on it. And this changes how death is understood. Because now dying in battle is not just honorable, it is correct. It is the fulfillment of one's place in the cosmic order. And this idea is expressed most powerfully in texts like the Rig Veda, where the gods themselves are not distant observers, but active participants in struggle, constantly engaged in battles that mirror those of humans. And among these gods, one stands out in a way that immediately recalls something familiar. Indra. Indra is not identical to Odin, but the similarities are impossible to ignore. He is a warrior god, a leader of other divine beings, a figure associated with storms, power, and battle. And most importantly, he gathers around him a retinue of fighters, divine companions who stand with him in his conflicts against chaos, against forces that threaten the order of the cosmos itself. And here, once again, we see the pattern. A central divine figure, a group of warriors gathered after death, an ongoing struggle that extends beyond the human world. But in the Vedic tradition, this idea becomes more explicitly tied to the structure of the universe. The battle is not just between armies. It is between order and disorder, between truth and falsehood, between forces that sustain existence and those that would unravel it. And the warrior, by dying in battle, becomes part of that larger struggle. He does not simply go to a hall. He joins the gods. He continues the fight on a different level. This concept is explored more deeply in later texts, particularly in Mahabharata, where the idea of the warrior's duty in afterlife is given philosophical weight in a way that feels both different from and deeply connected to the earlier Norse ideas. In the famous dialogue of the Bhagavad Gita, which forms part of the Mahabharata, A warrior named Arjuna stands on the battlefield, hesitating, questioning whether he should fight at all. And what follows is one of the most profound explorations of duty and death ever recorded, where he is told that the soul does not die, that the body is temporary, and that fulfilling one's duty, even in battle, is essential, because the consequences of an action are greater than the consequences of death. And in this moment, the connection becomes clear. Where the Norse warrior seeks Valhalla, the Vedic warrior seeks alignment with Dharma. Where the Einherjar fight daily to prepare for Ragnarok, the warriors in these traditions fight as part of an ongoing cosmic order that does not end in the same way, but still requires constant effort, constant engagement. The difference is not in the value placed on the warrior. It is in how that value is explained. And this becomes even more evident when we look at ancient Iranian traditions, particularly those connected to early Zoroastrian beliefs, where the afterlife is again tied to moral and cosmic struggle, and where warriors who fight on the side of truth, against chaos, against deception, are believed to enter a realm often described as the House of Song, a place not unlike a hall, where the righteous continue in a state of harmony and purpose. This is not a place of endless battle in the same way as Valhalla, but it is still a place of continuation, a place where the individual does not simply disappear, but becomes part of something larger, something ongoing. And what connects all of these traditions, Norse, Anglo-Saxon, Vedic, Iranian, is not the specific details, not the names of gods or the exact structure of the afterlife, but the underlying idea that death, especially in the context of struggle, is not meaningless. It is a transition into a different role, a different level of existence. And this idea, once again, can be traced back even further to shared Indo-European roots where the concept of the warrior, the hall, the gathering of the dead, and the continuation of conflict all appear in different forms across different cultures, suggesting that what we have been following is not a single story, but a network of stories, all branching for common origin, all adapting to their environments, their histories, their needs. And yet, despite these differences, something remains constant. The refusal to see death as an end. The insistence that what a person does in life, especially in moments of struggle, carries forward into something beyond it. And this is where the story becomes even more interesting, because as these ideas spread and evolve, they begin to interact with new systems of thought, new religions, new philosophies that do not always share the same assumptions. And in that interaction, they change again, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. In some cases, the warrior ideal is softened, transformed into moral or spiritual struggle rather than physical combat. In others, it is preserved but reinterpreted within new frameworks, knightly codes, religious martyrdom, national identity. But the core remains. The idea that there is value in facing conflict, that there is meaning in standing firm, even when the outcome is uncertain. And that death, in that context, is not simply loss. It is fulfillment. And when you step back and look at the entire journey, from the Bronze Age graves of Scandinavia, to the halls of Valhalla, to the mead benches of Heorot, to the battlefields of the Mahabharata, you begin to see something that is larger than any single culture. You begin to see a pattern of human thought, a way of making sense of the most difficult reality of all, that life ends. And instead of denying that, these traditions confront it directly. They build structures around it. Halls, heavens, orders, systems where death becomes part of something meaningful. And this is why the story continues to grow. Because even now, even in the modern world, these ideas do not disappear. They change again. They move into new forms, stories, films, games, philosophies, where the warrior may no longer carry a sword, where the battlefield may not look the same, but where the underlying idea still resonates. The idea that what you do matters, that how you face struggle defines you, and that in some way, that definition continues beyond the moment itself. And as the story moves forward once more, leaving behind the ancient battlefields, the ritual fires, the halls of timber and gold, it does not lose its weight. It changes its form, becoming less about literal belief and more about interpretation, less about gods and more about meaning. And yet if you look closely, if you follow the threads carefully, you begin to realize that nothing has truly been lost. Because the same ideas that shaped Valhalla, that echoed through Anglo-Saxon halls, that found new expression in Vedic and Indo-Iranian traditions, are still present, still active, still influencing how people think about struggle, death, and what it means to live a life that matters. And the transition into the modern world is not a break, but a continuation, one that happens quietly at first, almost unnoticed, as mythology becomes literature, literature becomes inspiration, and inspiration becomes identity. By the time we reach the early modern and modern periods, Valhalla is no longer a destination people expect to reach, but it has not disappeared. It has become a symbol, something that can be invoked without requiring belief, something that can be used to express ideas about honor, courage, and ultimate recognition. And this transformation is visible across different forms of culture, from literature to art to national narratives, where the image of the warrior entering a hall of the honored dead becomes a way of expressing the idea that some lives carry a different kind of weight, a different kind of ending. In 19th century Europe, for example, during a period of intense interest in national identity and historical roots, Norse mythology is rediscovered and reinterpreted in ways that reflect the needs of that time, appearing in poetry, painting, and music, often romanticized, sometimes exaggerated, but always centered around the same core themes: struggle, destiny, and the idea that certain individuals rise above ordinary existence through their actions. And composers like Richard Wagner play a significant role in this transformation, particularly through works like the Der Ring des Nibelungen, where elements of Norse mythology, including Valhalla, are woven into a grand narrative that blends myth with modern artistic expression, turning ancient stories into something that can be experienced on a stage, something that resonates emotionally even for audiences who do not share the original beliefs. But as the story moves further into the 20th and 21st centuries, the transformation becomes even more complex, because now Valhalla begins to appear in entirely new contexts, no longer tied to specific cultural movements or artistic traditions, but embedded in global popular culture, referenced in films, television, video games, and literature in ways that both preserve and reinterpret its meaning. And here, something interesting happens, because while the surface details often change, the armor looks different, the setting shifts, the characters are adapted. The core idea remains strikingly consistent. Valhalla is still a place of the chosen, still a place of warriors, still a place where death leads not to an end, but to continuation. And this persistence is not accidental. It reflects something deeply ingrained in how people understand heroism. Because even in a modern world where warfare is no longer romanticized in the same way, where the realities of conflict are understood in more complex and often more critical terms, the idea that sacrifice can carry meaning has not disappeared. It has simply been reframed. You see it in how societies remember their dead. Memorials, ceremonies, stories told about those who gave their lives in moments of crisis. These are not the same as Valhalla, but they serve a similar function. They create a space, whether physical or symbolic, where those individuals are gathered, recognized, and preserved in memory. A modern kind of hall. And the language used in these contexts often echoes the older ideas, even if indirectly. The idea of the fallen, the emphasis on honor, the notion that some deaths are different, that they carry a weight that sets them apart from ordinary loss. This is not mythology in the traditional sense, but it is built on the same foundation. And beyond real-world remembrance, the idea continues to evolve through storytelling, where Valhalla becomes a flexible symbol that can be adapted to different narratives, different genres, different audiences, appearing in everything from historical dramas to fantasy epics to modern reinterpretations of ancient myths, each time reshaped slightly, but never completely detached from its origins. What makes this possible is the simplicity and strength of the core concept. A place where the best are gathered. a place where struggle leads to recognition, a place where death is not the end of the story. And this concept is not limited to warriors anymore. It expands. In modern narratives, the warrior can be many things: a soldier, a hero, a person who faces overwhelming odds, someone who sacrifices for others, someone who stands firm in a moment where it would be easier to step back. The battlefield changes, but the structure remains. And this is where Valhalla becomes something more universal, because it is no longer tied to a specific culture or belief system. It becomes a way of expressing a broader human idea, something that resonates across different contexts, because it speaks to a fundamental need to find meaning in struggle, to believe that actions matter, that sacrifice is not wasted, that there is some form of continuation, whether literal or symbolic, that gives weight to the choices people make. And at the same time, modern interpretations often introduce a level of reflection that was less visible in earlier versions of the story, questioning the cost of this kind of thinking, exploring the tension between glorifying struggle and recognizing its consequences, examining what it really means to live a life defined by conflict, and whether the idea of a hall of the honored simplifies something that is, in reality, far more complex. This does not weaken the concept. It deepens it, because it allows Valhalla to exist not just as an ideal, but as a subject of exploration, something that can be examined, challenged, reinterpreted, and still remain meaningful. And when you bring all of this together, when you trace the full path of the story, from the earliest burial practices of the Bronze Age, through the structured mythology of the Norse world, through the adaptations in Anglo-Saxon and Indo-Iranian traditions, through medieval preservation, through modern reinterpretation, you begin to see that Valhalla is not just a single idea, but a continuous thread, one that runs through human history, connecting different cultures, different time periods, different ways of understanding the world. It begins with a simple question: what happens after death? But it does not stop there. It becomes a statement. What you do in life matters. And that statement is powerful enough to survive even when the beliefs that first gave rise to it are no longer held in the same way. Because it does not depend on the literal existence of a hall in the sky. It depends on something deeper. The human need to find purpose, to understand struggle, to believe that the effort, the risk, the sacrifice involved in facing the hardest moments of existence is not meaningless. And that is why Valhalla still exists. Not as a place you can travel to, not as a belief that defines a religion, but as an idea that continues to evolve, continues to be retold, continues to shape how people think about what it means to live, to fight, to fall, and to be remembered. And in that sense, the story never truly ends. Because every time someone tells it, every time someone imagines that hall, hears the clash of weapons, sees the warriors rise again, they're not just looking into the past. They are participating in the same process that created it. Taking an idea, shaping it, carrying it forward, just as it has always been. As the echoes of Valhalla faded into modern consciousness, their resonance did not die. Instead, they transformed, finding expression in new arenas of human endeavor. Where once the honored dead gathered in gilded halls under the gaze of deities, now the collective imagination turned toward other frontiers, frontiers of knowledge, of the cosmos, of humanity's own capacity to transcend its limitations. Just as the ancient peoples looked to the heavens and the spirits that might govern fate, modern humanity cast its eyes outward, toward the stars, toward the boundless unknown, in search of meaning, adventure, and the ultimate test of courage. The story picks up in the 21st century, a world profoundly interconnected, yet simultaneously vast and mysterious in ways that the ancients could scarcely imagine. Cities sprawl with electric veins, the heartbeat of civilization pulsing through fiber optic cables and the hum of machinery. But even here, the same human impulses that fueled myths like Valhalla persist. There is still a desire to be remembered, to achieve greatness, to confront the unknown with bravery, to leave behind a legacy that endures. The battlefield has shifted, less of shields and swords, more of ideas, experiments, and journeys into realms previously inaccessible. But the essence remains. The brave, the persistent, the visionary are still those who carve their place in the annals of history. In this context emerges the story of a new kind of adventurer, not a warrior of flesh and steel, but of mind, spirit, and unquenchable curiosity. Dr. Elias Marlowe, a polymath and explorer, embodies this modern Valhalla seeker. From the earliest days of his youth in the coastal city of Lisbon, Portugal, he was fascinated by the unknown, oceans, skies, and the uncharted depths of human knowledge. Libraries became his training grounds. The words of Herodotus, Pliny, and Ibn Battuta were as vital as any sword or shield in shaping his understanding of the world. The echoes of ancient heroism were not lost on him. He read of Viking explorers sailing beyond the edge of the known world, of Polynesians navigating by stars and waves, and felt a kinship, as if their courage coursed through his own veins. By the time he reached adulthood, Marlowe's pursuit had taken him beyond the borders of any one discipline. He moved seamlessly between quantum physics, oceanography, astrobiology, and ancient civilizations, always seeking patterns, always seeking the connections between the physical and metaphysical. And in this, he mirrored the heroes of old, not through battle, but through exploration. Each discovery became a duel with the unknown, each hypothesis a strike against ignorance, each expedition a march toward the uncharted hall of understanding that modern civilization, in its own way, had erected for those who dared to see farther than their contemporaries. The first great venture that cemented Marlowe's reputation took him to the depths of the Pacific, where geological anomalies hinted at a submerged civilization older than any recorded in human memory. Here, under crushing pressures and in the eerie silence of deep-sea darkness, Marlowe and his team discovered structures of impossible scale, submerged cities of stone that seemed to defy known history. Columns, walls, and vast platforms, encrusted with coral, yet unmistakably shaped with intent, suggested that humans had once reached heights of engineering sophistication lost to time. The discovery sparked a wave of excitement and debate across the scientific community. Scholars argued about dating, construction methods, and the implications for human prehistory. But Marlowe understood something deeper. These ruins were a bridge, a reminder that the past held secrets waiting for those courageous enough to uncover them. That heroism was not confined to the battlefield, but could be found in the relentless pursuit of knowledge. News of his discoveries spread quickly, bringing both acclaim and scrutiny. Universities, governments, and private sponsors vied to fund his next expeditions. Unlike many modern academics, Marlowe welcomed the attention, not for fame, but for the opportunity it afforded to push further, to go beyond the familiar. Soon, his focus expanded from the oceans to the stars. Space exploration became the new frontier, the ultimate battlefield for the mind and spirit. With private space companies democratizing access to orbit and beyond, Marlowe became part of an ambitious project to chart the asteroid belts and outer planets in search of resources, life, and clues about the formation of the solar system. It was in the cold, silent void of the asteroid belt that Marlowe confronted the most literal echo of Valhalla he had ever experienced. As his small crew navigated a field of metallic rocks and ancient ice, a pattern emerged in the trajectories of certain asteroids, a network of collisions and formations that suggested the presence of artificial manipulation. Detailed scans revealed structures embedded within asteroids, vast tunnels and chambers that appeared natural at first glance, yet upon closer inspection bore evidence of design and purpose. Marlowe hypothesized that an ancient, possibly pre-human intelligence had once explored and altered the solar system, leaving behind artifacts intended to challenge or guide future civilizations. The discovery shook the foundations of contemporary science and philosophy alike. Humanity's place in the cosmos suddenly seemed precarious, as though every theory and assumption might need to be re-evaluated. For Marlowe, however, it was exhilarating. He saw the work of those ancient architects as a modern Valhalla, a space where the courageous and the visionary could confront the mysteries of the universe, where discovery itself became a form of honor, where the stakes were nothing less than the understanding of life, consciousness, and destiny. The quest did not come without peril. Micro-meteoroids, radiation storms, and equipment failures threatened every mission. Crew members faced psychological strain, isolation, and the weight of their responsibility. Every day was a battle against the indifferent void, a duel with the elements, a test of endurance and intellect. And yet, Marlowe's determination never wavered. He understood that in this new era, heroism was defined not by conquest of others, but by the courage to face the unknown, to persevere when every measure of risk suggested retreat, and to act with integrity when confronted with ethical dilemmas that no human before him had faced. In these endeavors, the story of humanity's ancient past and the promise of its cosmic future intertwined seamlessly. The civilizations Marlowe studied on Earth, the Bronze Age cultures, the Vikings, the Polynesians, the Minoans, all shared a common thread: the desire to transcend, to leave a mark, to navigate the unknown. Now, humanity was poised to do the same on a cosmic scale. The metaphorical Valhalla had become real, in the sense that the chosen, the brave, the persistent, the visionary, could carve their place in a universe that had always seemed vast and indifferent, transforming knowledge and courage into immortality of impact. Yet, amidst these triumphs, the story also dwelled on the human cost. Relationships strained, personal health deteriorated, and moral dilemmas multiplied. Marlowe wrestled with the age-old question: what price is acceptable for greatness, for discovery, for legacy? And in these moments, he often returned, in thought, to the lessons of Valhalla. The honored warriors of myth had faced similar trials, albeit framed in terms of physical courage. The essence, however, remained the same. The pursuit of something greater than oneself demanded sacrifice, resilience, and, above all, a commitment to principles that transcended personal ambition. As the missions continued, the narrative expanded. Marlowe and his teams found signs of microbial life in subsurface oceans of icy moons, unearthed artifacts suggesting civilizations far older than humanity, and decoded star maps hinting at communication across light years. Each discovery was a story in itself, a testament to the interplay between courage, intellect, and serendipity. Together, they formed a tapestry, one that wove ancient myth, human ambition, and cosmic exploration into a single continuum. In this tapestry, readers and future generations would see reflected the same desires that had driven humans for millennia: the need to confront the unknown, to leave a lasting mark, and to honor those who had come before while carving paths for those who would follow. The story of Valhalla had not ended. It had merely evolved, finding new expression in the audacious endeavors of a species increasingly capable of exploring realms that the ancients could only imagine. And so, as Marlowe gazed upon the stars, charting courses through asteroid belts, icy moons, and distant exoplanets, he understood something fundamental. Heroism, honor, and the pursuit of legacy were not confined to myths, battles, or ancient halls. They were living concepts, evolving with time, adapting to new contexts, and inspiring generations to venture beyond the ordinary. The cosmos itself had become the ultimate Valhalla, an eternal hall where the courageous of mind and spirit could meet, challenge, and transform the unknown into understanding. And within that boundless space, humanity's story, woven from the threads of ancient mythology, modern exploration, and the indomitable drive to transcend, continued to unfold, infinite in scope, profound in consequence, and unceasing in its quest to define what it truly meant to live, to struggle, and to endure. Long before the echoes of modern exploration could even exist, the world of men and gods was one of immediacy, brutality, and sacred destiny. The concept of Valhalla, the great hall of the slain, was more than a myth. It was a lens through which entire societies understood life, death, and honor. The earliest records, though fragmented and entwined with myth, suggest that the vision of Valhalla evolved alongside the people of Scandinavia, growing from small warrior cults into a central pillar of Norse cosmology. In the frozen fjords and dense pine forests of what is now Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, warrior societies thrived in a harsh environment where survival required not just skill and endurance, but a deep understanding of ritual and belief. In these lands, the sea and the storms dictated the rhythm of life. Winter was long and merciless, and raids along the coast were not mere ambitions but necessities. The early Norsemen, whose very names have been lost to time, lived in a world where death was constant and where valor determined not only survival but legacy. It was in this crucible that the earliest conceptions of Valhalla took form. Valhalla, or the Hall of the Slain, was said to be ruled by Odin, the All-Father, whose gaze reached into the fates of men and gods alike. Yet the hall was not merely a reward. It was a crucible, a place where warriors were prepared for the ultimate battle at Ragnarok, the prophesied end of the cosmos. In many sagas, poets describe Valhalla as a grand hall with a roof thatched with golden shields and walls lined with spears, where endless feasting and combat trained the honored dead for the final confrontation of all things. But beneath this description lay a more profound truth. The Norse perception of heroism was inseparable from the reality of mortality. To die honorably in battle was not a tragic end. It was an ascension. The rituals surrounding death and warrior culture reinforced this belief. Archaeological evidence from burial mounds, such as those at Oseberg and Gokstad, indicates that warriors were often interred with their weapons, sometimes alongside horses or ships. These grave goods were not mere possessions. They were symbols of passage, tools for navigating the afterlife, and affirmations that the deceased would join Odin's chosen in Valhalla. The placement of the dead within elaborate mounds, often oriented with careful attention to celestial patterns, suggests a society deeply aware of the cosmic order and their place within it, a reflection of the intertwining of myth, ritual, and survival. Yet Valhalla was not reserved for all. The selection was exclusive, a divine judgment administered by Odin himself and his Valkyries, the choosers of the slain. The Valkyries were more than mythic figures. They embodied the societal ideals of honor, courage, and divine scrutiny. Through their eyes, the deeds of men were weighed. Those who displayed exceptional bravery in the chaos of battle were lifted from the mortal plane, while the cowardly or dishonorable remained behind, destined to fade into obscurity. This dichotomy between valor and mediocrity reinforced the cultural narrative that life's greatest purpose was courage in the face of inevitable death. Historical sagas, such as the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, capture these ideals with vivid narrative clarity. Stories of Sigurd the Dragon Slayer, Ragnar Lothbrok, and other legendary figures portray men and women navigating the treacherous interplay of fate, ambition, and divine influence. In many tales, Valhalla is both literal and symbolic, a place of preparation, reflection, and eternal trial. The warriors there engage in endless battles, yet their wounds heal each day, and they feast upon an endless supply of meat and mead, a cyclical training ground for Ragnarok. The symbolism here is profound. Life is transient, death inevitable, but the pursuit of honor can transform mortality into eternity. The evolution of the Valhalla concept can also be traced through regional differences. In Iceland, where isolation preserved many oral traditions, the sagas emphasize the moral and ethical dimensions of honor, portraying Valhalla less as a reward and more as an ultimate test of character. In Denmark and southern Norway, where coastal raids and maritime conquest were central to survival, Valhalla is depicted as a place of preparation for warfare, reinforcing the tangible link between martial skill and spiritual reward. Even within these variations, the unifying thread is clear. Valhalla represents the intersection of mortal effort and divine acknowledgement, a reward for those who embrace the chaos of existence with courage and skill. The influence of Valhalla extended beyond the battlefield. Social structures were shaped by its ideals. Chieftains, kings, and warriors cultivated reputations for bravery, generosity, and strategic acumen, understanding that their legacy would determine whether they were remembered in stories or forgotten in the snow. Poets and skalds played a critical role, immortalizing deeds in song and verse. Oral tradition ensured that even the faintest act of heroism could echo across generations, reinforcing the societal imperative to live and die with courage. In this way, Valhalla was not merely an afterlife. It was a moral compass, a societal glue, and a narrative framework through which communities understood their world. Yet, Valhalla was not the only hall of the slain. Other afterlife concepts coexisted. Folkvanger, ruled by Freya, offered a different fate for those who died in battle, emphasizing choice, love, and personal merit alongside martial prowess. These overlapping cosmologies suggest a nuanced understanding of life, death, and honor, reflecting the diversity of Norse spiritual thought. The interplay between Odin's hall and Freya's realm illustrates that even within rigid martial ideals, there existed space for reflection, compassion, and a recognition of different paths to legacy. As Viking society expanded across Europe and beyond, the mythology of Valhalla evolved in parallel with real historical events. Raids on the British Isles, journeys to Iceland and Greenland, and trade networks extending to Byzantium and the Middle East all reinforce the cultural importance of martial skill, courage, and divine favor. Chronicles from Anglo-Saxon England, for instance, often describe Norse invaders with awe and terror, noting their extraordinary bravery and unwavering sense of honor. These historical interactions, coupled with oral tradition, allowed the concept of Valhalla to extend beyond myth, influencing neighboring cultures and embedding itself into a broader European consciousness. Yet despite its prominence, Valhalla remained enigmatic, a realm whose boundaries were defined more by narrative and ritual than geography. For centuries, bards and poets shaped its image, each generation adding nuance and depth. Some emphasized the grandeur of the hall itself. Others focused on the psychological and moral dimensions of warrior culture. Through this continuous storytelling, Valhalla became both a destination and a mirror, reflecting the values, fears, and aspirations of the societies that imagined it. The historical resonance of Valhalla can also be observed in burial practices and artistic depictions from the Viking Age. Runestones, carvings, and frescoes illustrate warriors in battle, feasting, and journeying, often accompanied by symbolic animals such as ravens and wolves, creatures intimately associated with Odin and the afterlife. These artifacts suggest that the myths of Valhalla were not abstract fantasies, but guiding principles embedded in daily life, reminding warriors of the stakes of honor, the inevitability of death, and the promise of eternal recognition. Ultimately, Valhalla represents a convergence of history, culture, and myth. It is rooted in the lived experience of Scandinavian societies, shaped by environmental pressures, social structures, and human psychology. Yet it transcends its origins, becoming a timeless narrative about courage, mortality, and the pursuit of honor. For the Norse, the hall was both a literal hope and a symbolic aspiration, a place where the brave were immortalized and the indifferent faded into obscurity. And so, the story of Valhalla continues, not merely as myth, but as historical lens, reflecting the values, struggles, and aspirations of those who first imagined it. It remains a testament to the human desire for transcendence, for recognition, and for a place among the honored dead, where courage, skill, and integrity are eternally celebrated. The chill of the northern winds had long sculpted the lives of men, but also forged their legends. As the centuries unfolded, stories of individual warriors who strove for honor, and, ultimately, a place in Valhalla, became inseparable from the collective memory of the Norse people. Among these tales, some were rooted in verifiable history, while others existed in the liminal space between fact and myth, a testament to the Norse belief that the line between life and legend was permeable, especially for those who fell with courage. One such figure was Ragnar Lothbrok, whose name resonates through both saga and history. Though the historical accuracy of his exploits is debated, the impact of his legend on Norse culture is undeniable. Ragnar is described as a Viking chieftain whose cunning and bravery led him to raid the coasts of England and Francia, confronting kings and armies alike. In the sagas, his death at the hands of King Ella of Northumbria is framed not as a defeat, but as a passage, for Ragnar met his end in a pit of snakes, facing death with defiance and courage. It was precisely this valor that the poets emphasized, framing his journey as the path to Valhalla. Each element of his story, from strategic brilliance in battle to stoic acceptance of mortality, serve as a template for the ideal Norse warrior, reinforcing societal ideals and the tangible hope of eternal honor. The idea of Valhalla was intrinsically linked to the actual practices of war. Unlike romanticized notions of battle, the Norse experience was brutal and immediate. Warfare demanded not only physical prowess, but also tactical intelligence, an understanding of terrain, and an ability to maintain cohesion among men under extreme conditions. Siege warfare, coastal raids, and open field battles were commonplace, each presenting risks that could decide life, death, and the eternal fate of one's soul. The courage displayed in these moments was believed to be observed by Odin and the Valkyries, who recorded deeds of bravery for inclusion in Valhalla's eternal roster. This worldview influenced the training and upbringing of young warriors. From early childhood, boys were taught to wield weapons, navigate the unpredictable landscapes of fjords and forests, and understand the rules of honor. Storytelling was as vital a tool as swordplay. Sagas, poems, and oral traditions provided living examples of valor and virtue, instilling in each generation the aspiration to achieve deeds worthy of eternal recognition. Even the preparation for ritual combat and ceremonial duels reflected a profound awareness of death's role in society. Every act, whether in war or in daily life, was measured against the ideal of bravery, a test to determine whether a soul might one day ascend to Valhalla. Rituals surrounding death further reinforced this ethos. In some regions, warriors who died in battle were given elaborate funerary rites, often including cremation on ships or within burial mounds. Archaeological discoveries, such as the Oseberg and Gokstad ships, reveal that these were not simple interments but meticulously prepared passages. Weapons, shields, and even everyday items were included to equip the deceased for life beyond death. Horses, sometimes included in these burials, symbolized status and mobility, allowing the fallen warrior to journey to Valhalla swiftly. Some graves contained amulets or charms invoking Odin's protection, reflecting the belief that divine favor could influence one's afterlife. Valhalla was also a training ground for eternal combat, and this concept is vividly illustrated in the sagas. Warriors who entered Odin's hall did not merely feast. They engaged in daily battles that honed their skill and prepared them for Ragnarok, the ultimate confrontation of gods and men. The cyclical nature of these battles, where the fallen healed each day only to fight again, was symbolic of the Norse perception of life itself, repetitive, demanding, and ultimately a test of endurance and courage. In this eternal loop, the Hall of the Slain became both a reward and a crucible, shaping the character of its inhabitants and preparing them for a destiny that was both individual and cosmic. While Valhalla is often depicted as the reward for male warriors, the sagas reveal a more complex cosmology. Valkyries, for instance, are not merely passive choosers of the slain, but active participants in fate. Figures such as Brynhildr demonstrate that even in myth, female agency existed, influencing outcomes on both the mortal and divine planes. Valkyries guided the worthy to Valhalla, observed the courage of those in battle, and ensured that the hall remained populated with those capable of facing the apocalyptic battles to come. This interplay of gender, power, and destiny reflects a nuanced understanding of society, where the afterlife was as much about merit and valor as it was about lineage or status. The historical backdrop of Viking expansion further shaped the understanding of Valhalla. Between the 8th and 11th centuries, Norse seafarers ventured far from their homelands, raiding, trading, and establishing settlements across the British Isles, Ireland, Iceland, Greenland, and even reaching the rivers of Eastern Europe. These campaigns were not solely motivated by material gain. They also provided arenas for demonstrating valor, a proving ground for those aspiring to the eternal halls of Odin. Chronicles from the British Isles, such as the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, recount the arrival of Norse raiders with a mixture of fear and admiration, often noting their extraordinary resilience and martial skill. These encounters reinforced the cultural belief that bravery in battle was recognized both in life and in the afterlife. Even as the Viking Age drew to a close, the ideal of Valhalla persisted. The consolidation of kingdoms in Scandinavia, the spread of Christianity, and the decline of traditional raiding did not erase the cultural memory of the Hall of the Slain. The sagas continued to be written, oral traditions persisted, and the symbolism of Valhalla remained embedded in the psyche of the people. This persistence demonstrates that Valhalla was more than a mythological construct. It was a cultural framework for understanding life, death, and honor, resilient even in the face of social and religious transformation. Legends of specific battles and heroes illustrate the enduring power of these ideals. The Battle of Svolder, for instance, described in both historical and legendary sources, was a maritime engagement in which King Olaf Tryggvason of Norway faced a coalition of enemies. Though ultimately defeated, Olaf's courage in facing overwhelming odds became a model of valor, immortalized in poetry and saga. Accounts of warriors who fell with swords in hand, refusing to retreat, reinforced the belief that a death in combat, however tragic, ensured entry into Valhalla. Each retelling was not merely a narrative but an ethical lesson, shaping societal values and reinforcing the ideal that courage and honor transcended mortality. Artifacts and iconography further anchored the concept of Valhalla in material culture. Runestones, such as those at Jelling in Denmark, depict scenes of battle, feasting, and divine oversight, integrating myth with commemoration. Carvings of ravens and wolves, associates of Odin, appeared in grave goods, ships, and weaponry, symbolically connecting the living with the divine judgment that awaited the fallen. Even jewelry and amulets invoked protection and favor, reflecting a society in which spiritual preparation was as vital as physical training. These objects served as reminders that every action, every choice in life, contributed to the ultimate evaluation of one's courage and honor. The cyclical nature of Norse myth, intertwined with historical reality, underscores the timelessness of Valhalla. Ragnarok, the apocalyptic battle foretold to involve gods and men alike, was the ultimate test. Warriors in Valhalla were not idle. They trained for this confrontation, embodying the principle that life was preparation for a higher purpose. The sagas suggest that mortal actions, bravery, sacrifice, and honor echoed into the divine realm, influencing not only personal fate, but the broader cosmic balance. In this way, Valhalla was simultaneously personal and universal, a reflection of the interconnection between human deeds and the divine order. Through these layers of mythology, ritual, history, and material culture, Valhalla emerges not as a static symbol, but as a living framework, a cultural, spiritual, and moral guide for generations of Norse people. It shaped their worldview, justified their actions in life and death, and offered hope that the pursuit of courage and honor was never in vain. Even today, the idea of Valhalla continues to captivate, reminding humanity of the profound human desire for legacy, recognition, and transcendence. From the battlefields of Scandinavia to the halls of modern imagination, the legend of Valhalla endures as a testament to the eternal interplay between courage, mortality, and the pursuit of something greater than oneself. The halls of Valhalla stretched endlessly, a golden expanse of timber and stone, illuminated by a radiant light that seemed neither day nor night. Here, warriors of countless generations gathered, their spirits aglow with the valor they had demonstrated in life, yet restless with the eternal rhythm of preparation for Ragnarok. It was a place both of reward and of endless challenge, where the slain trained ceaselessly, sharpening weapons, refining tactics, and sharing tales of bravery. Each day was mirrored by the next, yet within that repetition lay a profound sense of purpose, a purpose rooted in honor, courage, and the inevitable confrontation of destiny. Among the throng of warriors, certain figures stood as paragons of what it meant to live and die in pursuit of Valhalla. Ragnar Lothbrok, whose saga had long straddled history and legend, strode across the hall with the calm dignity of one who had faced death and emerged not merely unbroken, but transformed. Around him gathered the spirits of warriors from distant lands and eras, berserkers whose ferocity had turned the tide of battles, shield maidens whose skill with blade and strategy matched that of kings, and unnamed foot soldiers whose courage in the chaos of war had earned them a place among heroes. All of them shared a quiet understanding. Their deeds, their choices, and their sacrifices had resonated beyond the mortal realm, weaving into the tapestry of Valhalla itself. The Valkyries moved gracefully among the warriors, their presence a constant reminder that selection and favor were never arbitrary. These divine escorts, half warrior, half messenger of the gods, chose who would ascend to Valhalla, guided by an intimate knowledge of courage and honor. They observed actions both grand and subtle, from the decisive blow in a battle to the steadfast defense of a comrade. Brynhildr, the most renowned of the Valkyries, walked with measured steps, her eyes reflecting the wisdom of countless ages. She paused before a group of newly arrived spirits, assessing their valor, their loyalty, and the strength of their resolve. Their lives had ended on mortal battlefields, but here, in the Hall of the Slain, they would continue to demonstrate the essence of heroism. Not all tales in Valhalla were of glory untainted by loss. Many carried scars of betrayal, misfortune, and the caprice of fate. These stories were not discarded, but enshrined, for Norse belief held that understanding suffering, endurance, and moral complexity was as crucial as celebrating victory. A warrior who had faced overwhelming odds and persisted, even in apparent defeat, was honored for embodying the true spirit of courage. The sagas whispered of men and women who had fought alongside friends and lost them, who had made decisions under the weight of impossible choices, and whose hearts had remained steadfast in the face of despair. These narratives interwove with the more celebrated feats, forming a mosaic of human experience elevated to divine significance. The daily rhythm of Valhalla was both rigorous and sublime. Mornings began with combat exercises, where warriors honed their skills through mock duels, group formations, and individual challenges. The clash of weapons rang out, a symphony of steel and resolve. Yet the training was not merely physical. Strategy, leadership, and tactical innovation were cultivated with equal dedication. Each warrior's growth was observed, recorded, and respected, ensuring that when Ragnarok arrived, every individual contributed maximally to the cosmic battle. By evening, the hall echoed with celebration. Great feasts, mead flowing from endless horns, and songs sung by skalds recounting the heroics of both the living and the departed. It was a cyclical existence, a balance of discipline and revelry, preparation and reflection, a mirror of the life that had once been lived. As centuries unfolded in Valhalla, legends converged. The spirits of warriors from distant lands and eras shared stories of battles across Europe, Asia, and the northern seas. They spoke of sieges that had lasted for weeks, of ships that braved icy fjords, of cities conquered and defended. Even as mortal civilizations rose and fell, Valhalla remained untouched by time, a sanctuary where the deeds of men and women transcended the temporal constraints of life. Within this convergence, the hall itself seemed alive, responsive to the valor of its inhabitants. The structure expanded, hallways opening to accommodate new arrivals, chambers forming where tales and strategies could be shared, and training grounds stretching wider to meet the ambitions of the eternal warriors. Yet the ultimate purpose of Valhalla was never complacency. All who resided there trained not solely for glory, but for the fated event of Ragnarok. The apocalyptic battle foretold to pit gods against giants and mortal champions against chaos incarnate. Odin himself walked among his chosen, observing, guiding, and imparting wisdom. He understood that while mortal deeds defined individual honor, the collective courage of these warriors would shape the fate of the cosmos. Each duel, each tactic, each lesson learned in the endless cycles of Valhalla contributed to readiness for the final confrontation. The anticipation of this cosmic battle was both a motivator and a constant reminder that life, death, and legacy were intertwined in a web of eternal consequence. Stories of valor, however, were not limited to the battlefield alone. The interactions among warriors in Valhalla often reflected leadership, loyalty, and moral choices. Decisions made in the heat of daily life within the hall could inspire others or test their resolve. Debates over strategy, discussions of past mistakes, and reflections on the motivations behind deeds created a living environment of learning and growth. A warrior's reputation was built not only through singular feats of courage, but also through the integrity and wisdom displayed in guiding others. Here, in a realm beyond mortal time, the cultivation of character was as vital as martial skill. The culmination of Valhalla's narrative was not merely in training or story sharing, but in the understanding that death in life was not the end. Every warrior who had faced fear, uncertainty, and the inevitability of mortality had achieved something profound. Their courage, honor, and resilience had been recognized by the highest powers, securing a place in the eternal cycle of preparation, feasting, and battle. In this way, Valhalla was both a reward and a responsibility, a hall of eternal life. Yes, but one in which valor must continue to be proven, refined, and celebrated. As the final ages approached, the gathering of warriors prepared for the ultimate transition. The sagas foresaw Ragnarok not as an immediate threat, but as the culmination of all bravery and all conflict. Those in Valhalla understood that their deeds would be tested once more, in a confrontation that would define not only the fates of gods and men, but also the moral and spiritual weight of courage itself. In the light of this knowledge, the hall became simultaneously a sanctuary, a school, and a crucible. Every battle fought within its walls echoed with significance. Each lesson absorbed resonated with eternity, and every tale of valor became a guiding star for future generations, mortal and divine alike. And so, the story concludes not with an end, but with eternal continuity. Valhalla remains a realm where the deeds of mortals echo endlessly, where courage is immortalized, and where the ideals of honor, bravery, and sacrifice are preserved against the decay of time. Here, warriors from every age, place, and saga find their place, preparing ceaselessly, celebrating eternally, and awaiting the final battle foretold in the myths of their world. The narrative closes with the recognition that while mortal life is finite, true valor is enduring. It transcends time, shaping both the present and the eternal, and in the halls of Valhalla, it will forever be remembered, honored, and tested. Thus, the legend of Valhalla, of warriors chosen for their courage, and of the eternal interplay of life, death, and cosmic destiny, comes to its final chapter, an ending that is not closure but continuation, a testament to the timeless pursuit of honor, the inevitability of fate, and the enduring power of myth.